I love my voice, and there are plenty of times I don't like it much at all. I mean, it's embarrassing at times, right? Like there are so many stories I have where it has disappointed me. It has, it has not done what I wanted it to do. And that is a part of the whole, but that could be true of my life in general and the whole trajectory of my personal story. So there are more times where I've been really surprised by it and I've been amazed by it and I've given it good love. And if I can understand the totality, if I can understand the whole of those experiences, then I'm embracing the whole of Davin as it's reflected through my voice.
You're listening to The Creative Imposter, episode number 82. Welcome to The Creative Imposter. I'm Andrea Klender, and today begins our series of interviews on voice. My guest for you in this episode is Davin Youngs, and I am going to let Davin explain all of the various things that he does around the voice because I really like how he frames it. And I'm also not going to tell you all of the things that we are going to talk about in this episode because, well, you're going to listen and you're going to hear them. Suffice to say that while I was speaking with Davin, I was getting goosebumps and chills. And then when I listened back to the episode during editing, again, goosebumps and chills. And even my show notes author, Lisa, confessed that she listened to the whole episode twice because there was just so much she wanted to absorb. This episode is for you, whether or not you consider yourself to be a singer, whether or not you are interested in performing, whether or not you think sound healing is cool or weird or whatever. And we'll get to that in just a moment. But I do want to tell you one little story about how Davin and I came to be connected in this moment, in this time, in Chicago, in this iteration of both of our lives. You may or may not know that I teach yoga at a studio in Chicago called Satnam Yoga. And one of the things that I love about Satnam is that the director, Karam Paul, she allows and invites and welcomes so many different types of healing modalities and traditions of yoga and complementary practices into the space in a really creative, authentic, holistic vibe. So one day recently, I signed up to attend a voice workshop with someone who I had never really heard of before, Davin Youngs, who had come highly recommended by one of my yoga students. I walked in the room and honestly, I was a few minutes late. I was kind of rushing and I sat in the back and they had already started a meditation. Ugh, I hate walking into meditations late. And so I promptly closed my eyes and joined in, and there was something immediately familiar about what I was hearing, but I couldn't put my finger on it. And then when the meditation ended, I opened my eyes and here was Davin Youngs presenting this workshop. And I thought to myself, I know him. How do I know him? It's not from the yoga community. I was sure of that. Have I taken a workshop with him before? No, certainly not. Maybe theater. Yes, maybe theater is the connection. He must somehow be involved in the local Chicago theater scene, which I have not been a part of for many years, but definitely was a part of for many years. And so I spent a good portion of the workshop distracted by trying to figure out what on earth show, project, theater company we had met during, and it was driving me crazy. And I knew for sure, less by visual recognition and more by voice recognition, that we had definitely worked together in the past. So after the workshop, I went up to him and I was like, Davin, we definitely know each other. How do we know each other? And he had not a clue. And admitted that I did seem familiar, but part of me feels like he was just being polite because this crazy lady is like, we know each other. How is it? On the way home that night, I was racking my brain because we had gone through every possible theater connection. And he said, yeah, no theater connections. We did realize that we were both from Michigan, but like totally different parts of Michigan. We did not go to school together and we just could not figure it out. So when I got home, I went through Facebook. No, not a sign of him on Facebook, no social media. It had to be an older connection than Facebook. And then finally, I had this distant shred of a memory of someone referring to him as young Davin, a voice saying the words young Davin. And suddenly that phrase triggered a memory of a voice studio, not at my university, not at my high school, but at a very specific 1-week summer vocal institute in St. Paul, Minnesota, with the mother of my, at that time, voice teacher. So my voice teacher was Grace Mannion at Western Michigan University, and her mother was Elizabeth Mannion, and Elizabeth Mannion was running the Summer Vocal Institute for opera singers. And Davin was part of that 1-week summer institute, and so was I. I was 100% sure of it. And so I pulled out my old photo albums. Yep. Manual photo albums with the little plastic pockets that you would slide the photos into. And I had just a handful of photos from the Summer Vocal Institute. And sure enough, there was one photo of us standing on stage at the end of the final showcase for the curtain call, which was following the drinking song from La Traviata, Libiamo. And there I am standing with a champagne flute in my hand next to young Davin Youngs. And so, of course, in a totally creepy stalkerish way, I messaged him on Facebook, showed him the picture, and the rest is history. Links to connect with Davin and see what he's up to, of course, will be in the show notes for this episode at thecreativeimposter.com/082 for episode 82. And if you happen to be a podcaster or aspiring podcaster, you will also find the link to She Podcasts Live, a fantastic new conference that is coming up very soon in October of 2019 in Atlanta. And if you have not yet gotten your ticket, you can click over using that link, and I will be co-facilitating an interactive panel on voice and podcasting called Fall in Love with the Sound of Your Voice on Friday afternoon at She Podcasts Live. I would love for you to join me there. All right. Are you ready? Goosebumps and chills. I promise. Here is Davin Youngs. Davin Youngs, tell our listeners a little bit about who you are and what you do in your own words. You do a lot of different things with a central theme of voice. So how do you describe the work that you are doing right now?
Oh man, if I had a description that worked well, I would be so happy, because this is the baffling question. The thing I can say sort of most easily is that I'm a singer. So everything I do is around singing and the voice and sound. And I'm really sort of leaning into this title of singer, teacher, and sound guide. So I sing as a performative act. I sing as a community building act. I teach people about their voice. I teach in a private singing studio with private singing lessons. And then I use my voice as a tool for healing and transformation and change with others through sound healing, sound meditation work. And then I lead others in collective singing experiences. So I host gatherings and workshops that bring people into spontaneous song together with just their voices. So the central theme is definitely the voice. The singular title that I can best offer is singer, but I also do a lot of teaching and facilitating and guiding along the way.
Did you grow up singing?
Yeah, it's like one of my earliest memories. Have a story of being 2.5 years old and performing for the first time, singing You Are My Sunshine at my parents' wedding anniversary party. And it makes me laugh to even think about that, because what kind of 2.5-year-old stands and sings a solo? It's a little freaky to think about.
I bet it was amazing.
I'm pretty sure it was too. No, but also kind of weird, right? It's beautiful to know that that's literally been with me since the beginning. And there's evidence of it from a very early age. And I was sort of obsessed with singing as a kid and wanted to take voice lessons very young, and lived in a small town and no one would teach me until I found one woman at the age of 11 who took me on. So it's been a pretty consistent trajectory around the voice for as long as I can remember.
And so then when you set off to college, did you know that was what you were going to study and that you were going to build this career? I'm assuming most people, when they say that they are a singer and that they want to be a singer, they're thinking specifically in the performing aspect.
Of course, yeah. And it's funny because, the summer that you and I met, so I'd had a lot of success in high school. So I'm from a very small town in southwestern Michigan, and I sang as a young person with a big, beefy, operatic baritone voice, and it was kind of an anomaly. It was an atypical sort of thing, especially in that area. And when you and I met, one of the teachers at the Institute had sort of swooped me out of a summer camp and told me, like, you should come hang out with my mom, who happens to be this famous opera singer.
And that was Grace, right? Grace Mannion.
Yeah, Grace Mannion and her mom, Elizabeth Mannion. And that summer really pushed me to the next level in terms of, that was the first time I ever heard people talk about conservatories for music. And I just laugh because I think back, like, I literally heard someone say Oberlin there, and like Cincinnati and Boston. And like, that's where I applied. Like, I didn't even know anything beyond that. I just, like, the three names that I heard that summer, I ended up applying to school for, because I just was sure that all I wanted to do was sing, and I was going to go to some school where all I had to do was sing. And so that's what ended up happening. And I ended up at Oberlin pretty much because of that summer.
So you are not a professional opera singer at this moment in time.
Not.
So when did things sort of shift for you?
I mean, it has been a long, windy road. I think anyone of a certain age can speak to that truth as an inevitability. But the truth of the matter is that I had a strong identity as a singer from a young age, and I was successful in a small town and even in the state of Michigan. And then I went to college, and that success changed. I mean, suddenly you find yourself amongst other people that are way more talented than you are. And I felt lost along the way throughout college in knowing that I was a really good singer and I had a gift and love for singing, but there was a feeling of inauthenticity that sort of emerged for me in the operatic style of singing. And also the community. There was something about the community that I didn't feel connected to in ways that I wanted to. And I had some key moments. Specifically, I had been accepted one year to the Chautauqua Summer Institute of Music, which was a prestigious summer program as a young operatic singer. And I just decided not to go because I didn't want to spend my time in that community of people. Nothing against the specific people, but it just wasn't how I was feeling I needed to be seen. And that's how I ended up in Chicago. I did inner city service work in Chicago, which was sort of like a departure. But that's when I think things were really shifted for me, because I was like, oh, maybe I don't want to be an opera singer. And if I'm not an opera singer, who the hell am I? Like, what possible identity is there underneath that? Because that's the only thing I've ever known and really dedicated a tremendous amount of energy to. That was at the age of 20 and 21, and I'm 38 years old now. And I think I'm kind of starting to figure it out. But it was a long path after that. I mean, it was very confusing.
Yes, that sounds very familiar to me. Yes, because in that summer with Grace and Elizabeth Mannion, Grace was my voice teacher at that time at Western Michigan University. And at the end of my freshman year, I dumped the voice major. It's similar to you. I was like, what am I even doing? I know that I have talent, but I don't feel like I'm as dedicated as some of these other people to the specific act of crafting this particular type of voice and to this repertoire. And I wasn't having any fun. And singing was always something that I had enjoyed, that I had loved. Being on stage was something that I had always enjoyed. And I felt so much pressure, and it had kind of sucked all the enjoyment out of it. And the only thing that I was enjoying were my voice lessons with Grace, because it was just purely about the singing, and it was purely about the text, and it was purely about discovering these different songs and these different arias. But everything else around music school felt terrible to me. And when I gave up that major, I remember feeling this whole identity crisis of like, if I'm not a music major, what am I? Like, where is my identity in this? And so I can totally resonate with that feeling of being a little bit unmoored and looking for, here's this thing I love to do that I've defined myself by for my whole life. And then now I need to do something different.
That experience that we had is a necessary life experience. I think it's actually more problematic if you don't have that experience in your life, that it's really good to be confronted with that. Because those stories we have about ourselves, those identities, they're false anyways, and they're often given to us through either positive or negative experiences in our childhood. And so I'm really grateful for that experience. But the fast version of the story is that I kept teaching voice. So this is what a lot of people like me do. You leave school and you don't know what to do, and so you teach others to sing, which is a really kind of messy path if you think about it. But the beauty of teaching is that you often end up teaching yourself through the process. And so I ended up happening upon a teacher named Jeannie Levetri in the midst of having a private voice studio that really grew. And I was working full time, but my private studio had grown organically quite large. And I came across a teacher named Jeannie Levetri who teaches methodology she created called somatic voice work. And that was the first time I ever encountered someone in the singing, teaching space who was really concerned with me making a sound that was authentic. And she approached the work from a functional standpoint. So understanding the actual physiological components of what it means to make an authentic sound, being that there's a possibility for functional freedom in your throat. And I know now that the reason I was feeling inauthentic in my journey is because I was affecting the sound through muscular manipulation. I mean, I was able at a young age to impress people through this heroic baritone. And it wasn't my most authentic voice. I also always think it's really important to include in this story that I was a queer kid in a small town in the closet. And this public persona of this big voice was a way of masking this hiding that I was doing. So after I worked with Jeannie for a long time and found a more authentic sound, the question became, what do I sing? Look, I've worked on my voice a lot. Like I can sing a lot of different things. I love to sing pop music. I love to sing R&B. I'm great musical theater sound. I can do a good classical sound, but what is my most authentic free sound and what kind of music does that show up as? And that's when I started to explore improvisational singing. And that's where the community singing experience grew, where I went to a place called the Omega Institute in Rhinebeck, New York, where I did circle songs with Bobby McFerrin. And I learned that people all over the world gather in community and spontaneously sing. And I kind of got addicted. And I came back to Chicago and started a community here. And that was really when things started to feel like home with my voice. Because I realized that all that work I had done to find the most authentic sound and all the skill building I had done for so many years around my voice, it actually had a home, and it was through free vocal expression and improvisation.
Okay, I want to unpack this phrase authentic sound a little bit more.
Yep.
Because I think that authenticity is a word that is very popular right now. A lot of people are desiring authenticity, both in what they're consuming, what they're reaching out for, what they want to hear, what they want to listen to, what they want to see, what they want to read. And also people who are content creators, we're looking for authenticity in our work. And it's kind of a tricky word to fully understand. So how can you describe authentic sound versus what you were doing before?
So singing at its core is most successful when the voice is a conduit for expression of emotion or feelings or the story of who we are or the story that we're trying to share through song. It's really important to know that the voice is a tool, but it occupies both spaces of being this tool, this medium, but it also is the thing. And it's unique in that regard. So any instrument that lives outside of your body cannot claim that. But the fact that the voice lives within you and is a product of your emotion, it is a product of your expression, it is a product of your breath, it is a product of your musculature and cartilage, it makes it the thing. But when you convey, for instance, tell the story of a song, the song is the most important part. Your voice is not the most important part. So that might not make any sense to a lot of people, but my goal in saying it is that authenticity embodies the totality of my expression. So having a command over the medium, which happens through a lot of work, time and practice, a lot of education, being surrounded by people who know a lot more than you do, and a freedom to express the story of who I am right here, right now, with as few inhibitions as possible. And then I also think authenticity best shows up in times of balance. So when I'm not swinging in one direction or the other too wildly due to other outside sort of circumstances, but when I find myself just feeling grounded and centered in who I am and with the ability and skill to express that, I think that authenticity is confusing right now because we find ourselves in a world where we have to project that constantly. So whether that be through social media, even in the nature of relationships and how they might have shifted due to some of these advances in technology and so forth, there's an idea that there's a projected self. And I think that we're often confused about what is our authentic self because there's my Instagram self. And that's me too, right? That is me. And it's a real part of me. I mean, I use it a lot. It better be a part of me. But that gets very confusing. So one of the things I love about things like singing and dance and anything that's an embodied experience is that, man, you're confronted with yourself in a very real way, the true self. And I feel like if you hang out long enough, authenticity is inevitable in those sorts of activities.
Yeah, I think that's the scary part about working with your voice is that there's this certain vulnerability to it, whether you're someone who has a lot of training and skill in terms of technique or whether you are not. So I'm thinking specifically about this workshop that I went to of yours at Satnam Yoga in Chicago. And I was participating, but I was also observing. I was very interested as somebody who works with voice and who coaches podcasters on their speaking voice, because a lot of new and aspiring podcasters have a hang up around the sound of their voice.
Sure,
they have a desire to create a show. They have a desire to express something. They know what they want to share. They probably know who their audience is. They find out all the tech that they need to create their show. They may even record a bunch of episodes and they have the episodes sitting there and there's this like fear of putting it out in the world. And it's less about the content. It's less about the message. And often it's very much, I don't feel comfortable with the sound of my voice. I don't like the sound of my voice. I don't think anyone's going to want to listen to my voice. And I think that there's this vulnerability. So when I was observing you and particularly observing the participants in this workshop, which I think that we were doing some circle singing, we were doing like some community improvised sounds as we were all standing in a circle and anyone could chime in with a sound or a vocalization or a rhythm. I could see the physicality of the participants who wanted to do something and they were hesitating, and you could see that internal battle that's going on as to like, do I do it? Do I chime in now? And then when they would make the sound, it was almost like this flush would come over them.
Yeah. I've worked with a lot of different types of clients in the private studio space. I partly built my business on literally inviting anyone who wanted to sing into the space, which is a good business model on the front end of any business. But what that led to, I mean, I've taught private lessons now for 16 years. And what that led to was I've worked with someone who literally had never sang Happy Birthday before. It like was too afraid to hear their voice in public singing, any sound like that even. To, professional singers who sing in front of 100,000 people. So I've worked with a very, very wide range of voices. So I say that to contextualize and express that the experience is very similar for all of those people, in that there is a natural vulnerability that comes with the voice because it is a natural expression by its very nature of who we are. The sound of my voice carries with it the story of my life. It carries with it the story of my experiences. And part of our journey in becoming more human is to love on all that. And the voice is this incredible mirror for that. And I think that most people know that. The difference for some people is that they're just more coordinated in making the sound, or they're more familiar or they're more practiced in it. To speak to your point about people recording their voices and not feeling comfortable with it, it is important to know that it is a learned practice to record yourself and listen. If you are hearing yourself recorded for the first time, you are not going to like it because it's going to be unfamiliar to you. So any professional voice user can tell you that's a part of their story, that they used to also hear themselves on voicemail and go like, oh, that's how I sound. But over time, you hear yourself enough and you go, oh, yep, that's how I sound. It's that simple. You have to keep recording and you have to keep doing it over, and you can make some changes and shifts along the way, but there is an element of just getting familiar. The same is true for someone like me. I grew up singing publicly a lot. I got a lot of affirmation around it. I was given praise around it. So I had the voices telling me I was doing something good. A lot of other people haven't had that. That doesn't mean they don't have beautiful voices, but it's not a part of their story to sort of honor that or praise that or lift that up. So it takes time. It takes time. And you need people around you that will support you in what you do and tell you how good it is, because you're probably not going to believe it at first either. But I will say that happens on micro and macro levels for everyone, regardless of who they are and regardless of how experienced they are with their voice. I love my voice, and there are plenty of times I don't like it much at all. I mean, it's embarrassing at times, right? Like, there are so many stories I have where it has disappointed me. It has, it has not done what I wanted it to do. And that is a part of the whole, but that could be true of my life in general and kind of the whole trajectory of my personal story. So there are more times where I've been really surprised by it and I've been amazed by it and I've given it good love. And that to me is, if I can understand the totality, if I can understand the whole of those experiences, then I'm embracing the whole of Davin as it's reflected through my voice. But I wanted to say, when you said those people took that moment, that chance, and then something came over them, I think it's twofold. One is that by the mere nature of making sound with your voice, you're transforming your emotional and physical landscape. So simply by vibrating, simply by humming, simply by speaking, there is a physiological change that occurs. There's a cellular change that occurs, and that cannot be underestimated. There's a emotional, psycho-spiritual element to that too. The act of being heard, what are the implications for that? These components, they inevitably lead toward the positive because it's a part of our personal expression, and whenever we're able to create and express, life becomes more full. And so that's to me the essential component. If I can get people to make a sound, they don't even have to like it. Chances are they're not going to like it, because remember, we have to learn how to like some of that stuff. We have to learn even what it means to like the sound. What is a good sound? What's a better sound? What's a worse sound? But if I can get them to make the sound, they will walk away having had a positive experience.
And so how do you structure these experiences? What are the things that you're thinking of in terms of holding that space for this group of random strangers who are here to explore the sound, and maybe they're excited and like gung-ho, and maybe they're nervous?
Totally, yeah. Well, so I do two things right now, predominantly, a lot of the time. So I create these sort of sound healing experiences, and I do this through improvisational singing with electronic looping devices and then instruments that are associated with healing and meditation. So the work that I did with Bobby McFerrin at Omega alerted me to this whole idea of improvisational singing. I've also studied with a teacher named Rhiannon on this work, and I've really created sort of a personal and spiritual practice around spontaneous sound, which is really difficult to describe until you experience it. But it's something like creating melodies and patterns out of what to some might seem like nonsense syllables. It's not gibberish, but that's something you might use to describe it. We call it personal language. But creating these sort of melodic and rhythmic phrases that are often repeated. With my loopers, I'll set up and create many, 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 many layers of this. But in groups of people, we essentially do the same work. So there would be people standing in a circle, and a leader would create a spontaneously composed phrase, repeated pattern that they would give over to a section of the circle, and then create another pattern that would interweave with that previous one until you get 4 or 5 patterns going, and suddenly you have this sort of orchestra of voices that might be understood as like a drum circle for the voice. And it is a really sort of fast way in to singing without having to have much, if any, skill. You don't have to know the words. You don't even have to know the song. You don't have to know the tune. There's someone who's going to lead it for you. All you got to do is get your part and repeat it, repeat it, repeat it, and repeat it. And you'll do it in a group even, so you'll be safe. So my sort of trajectory of the work I'm doing right now is, especially if I travel to studios and do this work, on a Friday night I'll perform, create a sound healing experience so people can hear me use my voice in this capacity. And then on a Saturday or next day I'll do a workshop that brings them into using their voice in a similar way. And I do a good job, I think, of not allowing people enough time to worry too much. Because if you sit and talk about it too much, they're going to be scared. But I think maybe even the workshop you did, I often will start, and I shouldn't give away these sort of secrets, but here I go. I often will start with sort of blessing on the space and bring people into the singing experience by simply singing the most simple pattern that I can come up with as a whole. So a lot of times that'll be just like dum, 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 thum. So the whole group will be holding that pattern down, and I'll improvise over it so that they have the experience of collectively making sound and supporting me in creating this sort of spontaneous song. That right there primes the pump, because then they're like, oh, I could sing. We're good to go here. And then that also helps me suss out like what's going on in the group too. But we also talk about the fact that a lot of people carry trauma. The number of people who have a story where someone told them they shouldn't sing, or they were too loud, or to be quiet. Or these stories are so common. And we know now in contemporary science that the body hangs on to that trauma, that there are physical ramifications, that literally the swallowing muscles of the throat might find themselves in chronic constriction because of a story from our past. So that's all very real. But the only way out of it, we also know through contemporary science, is to use the body. So you actually have to make the sound to find your way past the trauma. And that's hard for a lot of people, but it, like I said, it always ends better than it starts.
It always ends better than it starts. For someone who is in that space where they're feeling like they're not so in love with their voice, and they really would like to get to that space where they can hear their voice and not cringe, where they can feel more confident speaking and expressing without feeling this tightening. Because I think a lot of times people will say that, oh, I feel this tightening, or I feel this pressure, or I don't know how to make the sound come out. You know, they'll have that restriction. If somebody's curious about exploring this, where would you recommend that they begin? What can they do?
Well, so let me contextualize that just a little bit. So if you feel a tightening in your throat, it's real. So the thing that's important to know is that your throat is an incredibly vulnerable place on your body. It's the path for air to enter into your lungs. It's the only place in the body that someone could reach out with their hand and kill you. It's a very vulnerable place. So biologically, when fear or anxiety or stress arises, this is a place for protection. It's one of the first places we protect. And so we'll do that by literally closing our throats, holding our breath, stopping flow. And so if you're experiencing tension in your throat, it's not a psychological idea. It's probably a very real thing, but it's a biological response to what might be happening underneath the surface in your feelings and emotions. And so the first step with anything like that in the body is simply to notice it. And we'd like to notice it with compassion. So we could actually even notice it with gratitude and say, thank you, body, for protecting me, because I'm scared right now. This is uncomfortable for me. I'm fearful. What are the implications right now for being heard? And then try to get to know what you might be protecting against. What's at stake, really? But again, from a compassionate point of view, because the more we find judgment or criticism or self-loathing around what's happening within our body, the more we perpetuate these physical habits. And so that's a really great way to start. And it's simply by noticing the breath. Whenever we notice the breath, we bring ourselves back into our sort of fullest physical selves, which can attach to our energetic selves and spiritual selves as well. So starting in a place of embodiment is a really good place to start with kindness and compassion towards self. But if you really want to dig in further, finding a voice teacher. So in the speaking world, there are these people called speech pathologists, which sounds like you did something wrong if you have to go to a speech pathologist. But beyond speaking coaches, there are speech pathologists who are actually often affiliated with what are called otolaryngologists or laryngologists, which are ear, nose, and throat specialists that specialize specifically in the speaking voice and the throat. And you can go to one of those doctors if you feel like something's wrong. They will probably prescribe you speech pathology appointments. Usually insurance covers 4 to 6 of those appointments. And the speech pathologist can give you great tools for alleviating stress and tension in the throat. And there's nothing to be ashamed of about doing something like this. Professional voice users, from singers to news anchors to waitresses to teachers, often find themselves in this position where they need a little extra help and need to know what's going on with their voice. And then if you just are curious on a hobby level, you can go to a singing teacher who teaches functional vocal training. And honestly, I think singing by its very nature will free the speaking voice, because singing is running as speaking is walking. It's a more athletic use of the voice. It'll take the voice into the farther reaches that it might not get in speaking. So if you want to, for fun, do some singing lessons, because I think it can really positively enhance the voice as a whole.
people say, oh, well, I want to learn how to use my voice, but I don't want to be a singer. What are some other applications? Because you just mentioned how singing can help free things up for you as a speaker. And I know that I've always thought about the things that I do naturally when I'm recording or naturally when I'm speaking. I don't do them naturally because I was born speaking this way or knowing how to podcast. I do them naturally because I spent a lot of time and years and money and lessons going to someone to learn how to sing. And I think a lot of the things that I do when I'm speaking are from that musical singing background, like knowing how to breathe, knowing what to do with my body, knowing how to change pacing or pitch or tone, or these are all like musical things that come into speaking. So how might some people benefit from doing some singing work, even if they're not trying to be a singer?
Well, the thing is that the voice is an incredible mirror for the whole of our lives. So it is inevitable that in the work I do with people in singing lessons or in workshops, that any sort of blocks they have in their voice are somehow reflected in areas of their lives. And, I'm a believer in the chakra system. I'm a believer in energetic blocks as well as physical blocks. And I see these patterns. Like I said, I've taught a long time. I've worked with thousands of people in the private voice studio. So I know that there are certain themes that have arisen and I can see them. And when someone, for instance, doesn't have access to the top of their voice, there might be some patterns in their lives that are reflected around that, or the bottom of their voice. So ultimately what we're trying to do is we're trying to create better balance. And I have this belief that balance in the voice inevitably reverberates into the whole of one's life. So that's not a very specific answer to your question, but I can say that people routinely come to voice lessons and express more freedom in other areas of their lives as well, partly because they've left their throats open in a very literal sense. And when we do that, it's always unexpected what might enter in.
I think I saw something on your website about people saying that they leave feeling like they've had a therapy session, even though that wasn't the thing they were anticipating.
I mean, I had a guy not that long ago that came, really cool guy, rock singer, has been in bands and just really wanted to take it to the next level. And I just remember that second lesson, he was like, "This isn't about singing, is it?" I was like, we had specifically been working on singing, right? And I was like, nope. It never is. It's about the whole. That's always what happens. And you know what? The reason I know that is because I've gone through it. We talked about earlier, that transition of moving into a more authentic sound. For me, I wasn't living a very authentic life as a whole. So it's no coincidence that right now I really feel like I'm finally almost 40 years old, moving into this truer version of myself. I'm sure it will shift and change. But you know what else I'm doing right now? I'm singing really well. I'm surprised by my voice. I played a recording for a friend yesterday who's known me since childhood, and I was hoping for some critical feedback. And she's like, "I just keep thinking to myself that you sound free." I immediately was crying at her text because I was like, you know what? That's how I feel. And for her to hear that in the sounds that I was making is a tremendous gift. And it's been a hell of a long road, and it will continue to keep going. But I really, really believe that through personal experience.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And so we've been talking a lot about the experience for the one who is making the sound.
Right, sure.
For the one who is speaking or is singing or is creating these sound patterns. But I'm also thinking about the experience for the listener.
Yes.
And especially in the work that I do, both as a podcaster and podcasting coach, and also in the class that I teach at Satnam Yoga, which we sing mantras while we're doing yoga poses, which sounds a little nutty until you try it. And then you're hooked and addicted. But there's something about hearing that kind of sound that is also very transformative for people. And I think that's why podcasting is becoming so popular right now. There's something about listening to the sound of someone's voice when that person is aligned, as you say, and authentic and in their truth, that can be so affirming. And
yeah, because we know when they're not.
Right. It's so obvious. I keep reading these statistics that you would think logically that the best medium for getting someone to know, like, and trust you, like in the content marketing world and things like that, you would think it would be video, right? Because you can see the person, we know about eye contact and things like that. But what I've been hearing is that statistically, actually, audio is more effective for building that know, like, trust relationship with your audience, and your podcast listeners develop a more intimate bond with their host than people who are, like, say, on YouTube. And there's something about being able to zero in on the sound of someone's voice that is extremely compelling. And I'm not saying this in a manipulative marketing way. I'm saying this in,
like that's a plug if ever I heard one. All right. I love it. No, I know exactly what you're saying.
It's like this oversaturated, like we're constantly saturated with stimulation right now, right?
Yeah.
What I want to bring this to is the work that you're doing with like the sound healing experiences where people are just receiving.
Yeah. So that's the thing I'm spending actually the most time doing right now, which is interesting because I've spent so much time teaching and leading, but now I'm in this position of sharing in a very unique way for me. But I think in general, it's really unique what I'm doing. And you're right. People uniformly walk away from those experiences like affected in ways I just wouldn't ever expect. So there's some pretty good science around like specific pitches do certain things to people in certain ways. So we know that there's some truth to that. But there's also some like argument about that too. Like this crystal bowl does this to someone with their heart and this does yada, yada, yada. And people will argue about that. But one of the things that's associated with those sorts of instruments and the pitches and what they do is the quality of the sound and the complexity of the sound. And when I think about that and I talk about the voice, I think about the ability of the voice to carry with it a tremendous amount of complexity and the ability to alter quality through intention and skill. And so this is what I'm really excited about right now on a personal level is what does it mean to use my voice with intention to hold space for healing in people's lives, for transformation, for change, for restfulness, for any sort of good that we can come up with. Am I able to contribute to that with my voice and that intention? And so far, the answer kind of seems to be yes. I mean, I'm one of these people, like, I hope you probably won't hear me call myself a healer because I think that that's like a really loaded term. I actually asked a friend once what she thought about people who call themselves healers. And she's like, I think it's kind of like when you call yourself a good lover. Like, it's not real. Like, it's not really for you to say, like someone else can say that about you, but you probably shouldn't say it about yourself. So I don't believe that I'm a healer, but I do believe I'm a guide. And I think that I can hold space for the possibility of healing because I think that people have the ability to heal themselves. And I think that the universe is rigged in our favor to move toward growth and expansion and healing. And I think that my voice is my gift. Like I said, it's the thing I've done the most. It's the thing I know the most about. It's what I've worked the most on. And so I'm really interested in just using it as a vibrational tool to act as sort of a cushion for people to lay upon, to get good rest and find their way into somewhere that feels different than where they started. So I'm doing that with those instruments, but I'm doing it with electronics too, which is a whole other thing because then I can add this multi-dimensional component through effects and so forth. But yeah, it's cool. I'm stoked about it.
This is the thing that's so amazing to me as I'm watching your social media. You're doing it in spaces like hotels and the Apple store downtown Chicago, which is like, when you say, oh, crystal bowls and electronic loops, like it starts to get into that space where people are like, oh, I don't know about that woo-woo kind of sound healing space, but you're selling out these very like non-woo-woo mainstream type venues with this type of work, which just tells me how needed it is.
Yeah, right? Yeah, totally. Here's what I can say is that I don't come from a background of comfort in the woo. So, I come from a spiritual background. I come from a conservative Christian, Protestant, evangelical upbringing. I'm very comfortable with the idea of God and the Spirit. In the most recent years of my adult life, those ideas have expanded tremendously. And so I'm super comfortable with the woo now, but I bring to this work an understanding of skepticism. I know it very well. And so there's that element to what I do. But also, I bring to the work, I think, a high level of artistry, which is not always the case in that environment. It's not always the focus in that environment. I'm going to be releasing some music really soon, and I'm really interested in how people will receive it, because I think that my friends who are used to more traditional sound experiences and sound healing are going to be like, this is some weird stuff, Davin. Like, it goes to some weird places. But then I also like wonder if my friends who are more of the strictly musical bent will be able to recognize that this isn't just like ambient music for meditation, that I'm playing with chord structures, I'm playing with rhythmic devices. Like, there's a lot of different elements that I'm bringing into play. And that, I think, is allowing me into these environments, because you can find your way in from the woo angle, or you could find your way in as just the consumer of music. But I'm there for you on both levels, and I've lived on both levels, and I believe that they can coexist, and that, that they both can serve as tools for healing. That's the best way that I can sort of find myself in this. But I also just think that culture is evolving so quickly right now. I mean, there is a need for mysticism. I don't know, like, it just feels like it's palpable. Like, we want collectively to feel the presence of something that lands outside of the bullshit of every day. And there's a lot of it right now. I mean, I ask myself, how do we do this? Like, how do we go from mass shooting to mass shooting? Like, how do we deal with these sort of explicit acts of oppression? How do we find ourselves amidst this undeniable desecration of nature? And I'm a participant in all of that, right? Like, I can't help but be more than I would like to admit. But I think amidst that, I know that people are good. I think that their true essence is good. And when they find themselves in situations that illuminate that goodness, it doesn't matter where it is. It could be a yoga studio. It could be the Apple Store on Michigan Avenue. But if it calls into light their inherent goodness, their essential truth of who they are, I think that it's what we're all craving. And that's really what I strive to do with all of this.
Okay, so we're coming to the end here. And I'm just wondering if there's anything that's coming up for you that feels like something that hasn't been said, or that you want to share with the person who's listening to this and feeling inspired to explore something new or to think about something in a new way. Like, what have we not said?
I think I keep landing in this idea that you just need to lean further than you think you do. And if you do, you will be received by the right people well. Through this sort of work I've done, I keep finding myself, even if I think back to making the transition from being a classical singer into working in an office for a while, I think about that. It was a really hard change and hard shift. And there was a lot of tears around that. But overall, all of those choices kept pointing me toward the next step, toward the next person that would lead me toward the next thing. And I now know, because I'm just a little bit older, that the quicker and the harder I lean, it's better. Like, just go, do the thing. Like, there's no time like now, and you will inevitably be grateful that you did. Don't wait. You can't. You just can't anymore. And all the time that you do is time that you sort of sacrificed, not on the greater journey, but sacrificed away from finding that sort of essential truth within yourself. So I'm leaning hard right now. Like, I'm all in. And I know that there are people on the sideline from previous lives that are going like, what is he doing? You know, I can only imagine. I mean, I'm sure like my family in particular is like, I don't get it. But for all of those people, there's been this new community that's emerged that people are like, yeah, like this is so great and so cool. And so I'm uncomfortable and grateful.
Ooh, what did I tell you? Goosebumps and chills, right? I mean, I don't usually listen to podcast episodes more than once, except the ones I'm editing. But this one, I might have to listen to it again. Will you? I encourage you to check out Davin's work, connect with him over at davinyoungs.com. The link will be in the show notes for this episode at thecreativeimposter.com/082. And guess what? If you're not in Chicago, you might still be able to catch him live. I happened to notice that he has some upcoming dates in Mount Hope, West Virginia, Brooklyn, New York, and Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. So if you are in any of those areas, I highly, highly, highly encourage you to see if you can make the time to connect with Davin in real life. And also, I have been thinking about what the experience of listening to this show, The Creative Imposter, is like for you. I know what my experience is like in making the show, and I have a pretty good idea of what my guests' experiences are like being on the show, but I really am curious about what your experience is like as a listener to the show. And I would love to get some feedback from you and hear your voice, if at all possible. So would you indulge me? Would you send me a quick message by recording a voice memo on your phone, just a short message, and letting me know what it's like for you to be an audience member of The Creative Imposter, what you love, what you've learned, how you feel after listening to a specific episode or episodes in general, anything that you have incorporated into your life or practice or work as a result of this show, any connections that you've made. I'd love to know, because this will help me in shaping more quality content for you and in supporting you in making even more of those connections and realizations. So record that voice memo for me and then email it as an attachment to Andrea at thecreativeimposter.com. Again, that's Andrea at thecreativeimposter.com. And if for the life of you, you cannot figure out how to send an audio message, that's fine too. I'd love just a regular old email with text that I could read on the show. And of course, if you are doing something creative, whether that is podcasting or blogging or running an Etsy shop or taking photographs, whatever it is you do, if you have a website or a social media account where you would love to invite other listeners of The Creative Imposter to check out your work, please include that with your voice memo, message, or email. I want to thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this episode, for sharing your energy with the community, and hopefully very soon, your voice. Oh, one more quick invitation. If you happen to be in Chicago and would like an opportunity to share your voice in a totally chill, intimate, no pressure environment, I am co-hosting a creative happy hour coming up at the end of September at a private residence in downtown Chicago, and the theme is storytelling. We're going to work on it a little together and have some fun while we're doing it. I will include details for this event in the show notes for this episode. Now, this event is technically totally sold out, but if you reach out to me directly and say that you are a listener of The Creative Imposter and you really, really, really want to come, I'll let you in. This episode was mixed by Edwin Ruiz of Mondo Machine. Our theme music is by Jovia Armstrong. And this week I am extending an invitation to you to spend some time making sound with your voice, whether that be singing along to one of your favorite songs in the shower, or chanting a mantra during your meditation practice, or humming and making totally nonsensical sounds in the middle of your afternoon, or telling your story or any story to someone else. I invite you to set aside some intentional time to play with the sound of your voice and to pay specific attention to the sensations, the feelings, the thoughts, the emotions that arise when you set aside that intentional time to connect with that thing that is simultaneously a tool for self-expression and a deeply personal, essential part